Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Secrets of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. We welcome you to these programs which attempt to explore some of the impact of longevity on our families, our community, and ourselves. Please feel free to contact us with ideas and suggestions to me, Rabbi Address at jewishsacredaging.com, and also just go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and visit us and like us on the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page. So we've covered all of that. We are pleased also for today's edition of Secrets of Meaning to welcome as our sponsor the Rothkopf Elder Law Firm, which provides a full range of assistance to individuals and family in the area of elder law. You can contact them at rothkopflaw.com or their phone number at 877-475-1101. And it is with a great deal of pleasure that we welcome to the Seekers of Meaning podcast and TV show Rabbi Zoe Klein, coming to us all the way from the beautiful shores of Los Angeles, California, my old hometown for a while, here to discuss an absolutely fantastic, let me get this out of the way right away, new book published by the CCAR Press called Candle, Feathers, and Wooden Spoon. Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon, New Jewish Stories. For those of you who are not familiar with Rabbi Klein, she is literally one of the most gifted, creative, talented colleagues that we have in the United States today. Writing, creating, we've used some of her rituals in the workshop we do on new rituals for new life stages. Zoe, welcome. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you. And you've been such an inspiration to me. Anytime I've heard you speak, I still have pages and pages of notes from your lectures and presentations that I refer back to all the time.
The check is in the mail. So, again, this is a wonderful book.
Thank you.
For those of you who will know Rabbi Klein, you'll hear her voice in many of these just very wonderful stories. The power of stories, Zoe. What is the power of stories in people's lives, and especially the power and importance of one's own story as we get older?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. Well, I first want to say that when I sent this proposal to the CCAR Press about this idea of this anthology of short stories, the response I got was, "We love your writing. We'd love to do a project with you. However, we don't publish fiction." And I responded to that and said, well, if you would indulge me for a little bit, I'd love to make a case for why maybe you should. And it really speaks to the power of storytelling. And the case that I made was just the idea that if the goal is to transmit values, Jewish values, teachings, lessons, history, there's no better vehicle to transmit that than stories. Because there's something about, you read nonfiction. Nonfiction is amazing. All writing is powerful and, can be impactful. There's something about stories that impress themselves into the clay of your heart. It leaves an impression. It attaches itself to your emotions. It'll, wakes up all of your senses. So there's such power in fiction. And the interesting thing about growing older, I love the idea of using metaphor in therapy or in counseling. And oftentimes when I meet with congregants in my office, I try to look for a metaphor that will help shift how they're feeling. So I'll give a quick example. I was once talking to a congregant many, many years ago who had had a double mastectomy, and she was having a lot of trouble loving her body and recognizing her own body. And she saw disfiguration, and it made her really unhappy. And so I suggested that perhaps we could imagine your chest as an altar and your breasts were the offering, were the sacrifice, the lambs that were offered up for a greater good. And years later, she wrote to me and said that she still, when she sees her own body, she thinks to herself, sacred altar. And I think it's true with aging too. You get age spots on your hands. You can look at them as something that is disfiguring, or you can look at them and say, look at those lily pads floating in a little lake. You can write new metaphors and poeticize the stage, laugh lines can be bouquets as opposed to wrinkles. So there's so many ways to play with fiction, metaphor, poetry.
And our tradition is filled with story. I mean, midrash is how many rabbis, use midrash, all the time to tell that story.
That's true. When you look at the Torah is all, as of course, it's all consonants. There's no vowels. And so it's almost like a carcass until you chant it, read it, interpret it, study it, because you're breathing. Vowels are all air, right? They're all neshama, they're all breath. So we breathe our soul into the stories. That's midrash, but it also is what brings it to life.
Right. Listen, that's why that the blessing asok, to play with it. Let it's my buddy Jakey, Rabbi Jakovsky of blessed memory. He always used to teach me about the most powerful word in that blessing is la asok, because you just and you've done Torah study all the time. You let the text speak to you where it hits you. I'm fascinated by the creative process. So these stories, and we're going to get to some of them. They're short, but they're powerful. How do you write? Do you lock yourself away? Do you go to an Airbnb in Laguna? Do you get inspiration?
That sounds good.
Are you inspired by sitting on the 405 trying to get into Beverly Hills or something? Because it is a big parking lot. Where do you draw your inspiration from? How do you write?
I'm so fascinated by how writers write. So I'm right there with you. I love hearing how writers write. For me, I think about the 2 candles on Shabbat representing remember and observe. And I think that that's a lot of what goes into any kind of art. You have to be observant of, scenes unfolding around you, details, and you have to remember them for when you're sitting and you're creating. My preference is so funny. People are always posting online about the beautiful view, right? Look at this beautiful view I'm seeing. For me, give me a windowless room and a computer, and I can go anywhere. And I really like to be in solitude when I write. Now, the interesting thing is I'm not in solitude almost ever. So, I'm working full time and have been at Temple Isaiah for 24 years. And I have 3 children, 2 of whom are now out of the house, but there's not a lot of room for quietude. And so I know some writers can write, a couple of hours at night after children are asleep. Some, can squeeze an hour in in the morning. For me, I really rely on my day off on Mondays. I need a good 6 to 8 hours of alone time to write, even if I'm just writing a page or 2. I need that warm up time of staring at the screen just without moving. I need to kind of immerse into the blank canvas or the blank page. And I need time to get into the world. But there's field work I can do in the meantime. There's one story, The Magic Word, which is about a character who's somewhat of a linguist. She's interested in linguistics. And I made a commitment to myself that I couldn't write that story until I listened to 20 podcasts by linguists. And even though it's a short story, I wanted to really immerse into the language of linguists. What do people talk about when they study linguistics? So I love that aspect of writing, which is the immersion in the world. And that for me takes time and it takes a removal of any distractions. So sometimes when I get all bottled up and I just can't find the time because those Monday days off, shopping still has to be done. Laundry needs to be folded. There's other things that creep in. Sometimes I will rent that Airbnb for a couple of nights or for a weekend, or take part of a vacation and do that. And I really value that time.
No, I know a friend of mine who is writing, who literally rented a place for a couple of months during the winter, and just for exactly this reason, she had to finish this book, and that forced her to do it. So I understand that. I admire it.
I did the same thing. I had my sabbatical in this winter, and I rented a cabin in Tennessee. and I was there for a month. And my biggest fear about doing that was that I was not going to want to come back. But I even ended my trip 2 days early. So I'm happy to note that I really missed everybody. I couldn't wait to come back.
Big difference between Tennessee and LA, but that's another story for another time.
It's true. I was in rural. I didn't really interact with anyone.
Well, okay. How do you see, we'll have colleagues, perhaps listening or watching this, adult education people from congregations, organizations. How do you want this book to be used? Because you have questions at the end of every short story. You have a series of sort of like discussion questions. Do you want this as a book club? Do you see this being used in confirmation classes? How would you love to see this being used?
Well, you mentioned confirmation classes, or or a short story club would be wonderful. I love the idea of creating a short story Shabbat, where every Shabbat you share a story and discuss them. The questions at the end are really designed to elicit a lot of conversation and reflection, and not just that, relationship. I think that's really the ultimate thing, is to discuss the questions with the goal of connecting with other people more deeply and forging stronger relationships, questions that you might not have ever explored together. And so the stories, the stories spark that kind of communication between people. So book clubs, I love the idea of it being integrated into a confirmation curriculum, where students can read, the stories, a story a week or a story a month, and then have conversations and maybe even write new endings or take the stories to inspire their own stories. Some of them could be used around campfires, or I'll tell you, Richard, my fantasy is that the stories break off of the page and become new stories in the hearts and the mouths of other storytellers. So similar to, if you take a story from Helm, for example, or some of the classic Midrashim, we retell them and we add our own nuance and our own experience and our own color and texture. And to me, that's where things really come alive. So
speaking of coming alive, I got to ask you about this. The title of the book is Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon.
Yes.
So you have the title story, Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon, basically about midway through the book. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking to myself, this is Star Wars. This is the classic, mythology. The hero has to prove themselves, has to have it. It's the Wizard of Oz to kill the witch.
It's a quest.
It's the quest. It's the quest. So talk to me about this, because it's a great story and it's intergenerational. It's got grandpop. It's really, just talk to me about this. You got to read you get the book, you got to read this, and it's a sermon. Forget the sermon. Just read the story and then have a conversation.
Well, it's so interesting that you say Star Wars, because the story that inspired that inspired the outline of this story, the structure of this story, was a chapter book called My Father's Dragon. Do you know My Father's Dragon?
No, thanks.
So I read it to my children, and it was about a boy, and he hears the stories of his father, and he wants to try to rescue this supposed legendary dragon. And he does so with mundane objects. And it's really very exciting. And so I thought about the mundane objects, the candle, the feather, and the wooden spoon, and that we already have this quest built into our tradition. And it's not one of the major quests. It's not, the story of the Exodus, or, it's this very gentle little thing that happens before Passover, looking for the last bits of chametz in the house. And so I love the idea of taking these mundane objects and being able with them to go on this incredible adventure. And the adventure takes this boy through many chapters of Jewish history. And in doing so, he becomes more sensitive, more curious, more interested in his grandfather's story and where his grandfather's bitterness comes from.
Yeah, I don't know what searching for the right word, reunification. The relationship of grandpop to the boy, and at the end, the understanding of the bitter, whatever. It's just a lovely story. It's just a really very human, and I think a lot of families will be able to relate to it in a variety of different ways. And the intergenerational thing is it's just very touching and very meaningful.
Well, I removed the parents from the story by making them caterers. So anytime there's a Jewish holiday, I imagine caterers are working very early and very late to, they have a lot of hours that they have to spend at their work. And so it leaves this boy alone with his grandfather. And there's so much misunderstanding between generations. The story really is about the seeking of intergenerational healing and understanding each other's trauma and listening and connecting through Jewish rituals. So, it speaks to maybe movies like The Never-Ending Story, which also has a grandparent telling a story to a child, and other kinds of frameworks.
Oh no, it's it's like that opening scene with Peter Falk and the little kid and The Princess Bride.
Yes, right, exactly.
It's like which a classic, great film, and another type of quest. But it's and the catering thing. But there's a lot of you've seen this. We all seen this. Talking to kids. Well, my parents are never around. They're so busy working. So they're, of course, they're making a living. Trying to do this for you. So and so many grandparents now. We just did a program for this at the local JCC. Are heavily involved in caregiving for their grandchildren.
Absolutely. And what a gift that is. What an incredible gift, not just to the parents, but to the child.
Oh, it's the best. They're the best. You'll find out. It's the best things in the world. Best things in the world. Speaking of the best things in the world, you have this other story with a line that's fantastic. I got to ask you about this line. The most important person in the world. Another great story. Yes. With this line, he talking about students in a classroom. He taught her about lines that breathe and how this great line: perfection is sometimes the enemy of creativity. And I underline that. It's just a great talk about parents idealizing. Almost it's like the Akedah. You have to fulfill my fantasy. You have to be perfect. You have to get the A. If you don't get an A, we see this all the time. Talk to me about that story. Great line.
Yeah, well, that's, thank you for bringing up that line. I really learned that lesson from my father, who is a studio artist. And one of the things he taught me when looking at visual art is he always taught to first look at the lines. That how you tell the difference between a great painting and a not great painting is how the artist handles lines. And whether the lines can breathe. And that's such an interesting concept when you take that off the canvas and apply it to relationships, to, how much space, how much tzimtzum we do of self in order to give other people space to breathe. And communities, are we building fences too high around our communities? In what places are the lines perforated so that we can grow? That story is the rabbi in this girl's religious school asks the question, who is the most important person in the world? And it's a question that's often explored in history classes. And it often leads to really interesting essays. Is it Johannes Gutenberg who, created the printing press? Is it, Jonas Salk? Is it Mother Teresa? You can think of all sorts of, is it Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Who's the most important? Is it your own grandparent, mother, friend? Is it yourself? And the interesting thing is that at any given moment, we each, by the very nature of being created, we have a purpose. Just like Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav said, how do you know that you're here for a reason? Because the chair you're sitting in is full. You're here. That's the answer. And so it's one girl's, and specifically, she herself is an artist. So she looks at things already from a little bit of a different creative perspective. It's her discovery. Who is the most important person? How do we measure that?
But we won't give away the end. No spoiler alert, because it's a lovely end. We're speaking with Rabbi Zoe Klein, the author of a brand new CCAR published book, Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon. And we're going to be back with Rabbi Klein right after this message from our sponsor, the Rothkopf Law Group.
We are health care advocates to help navigate the issues associated with the aging process, to access benefits that are available for those individuals.
Rothkopf Law Offices helped us with my mother's home. We didn't know that we had to put it in my mother's name in order to save the home. Everything that he said is true. I mean, we've had so many questions, and it didn't matter when I call, everybody is always there.
In one word, it's been incredible. And the expectations going in, because we didn't know what we were going to be involved with, the situation, how we were going to deal with any of these items. The expertise, the service, and implementation of the plan has been totally critical to the success that we've experienced.
A group who understands how important the care is paramount.
I would highly recommend that anyone look at their website, review the information, look at their client experiences. We've been very satisfied with everything from start to finish.
Welcome back to today's edition of Secrets of Meaning from Jewish Sacred Aging. And again, our very talented and creative guest today, Rabbi Zoe Klein, and her new book, Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon, subtitled New Jewish Stories, with a lovely introduction, by the way, by Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso, who makes a very, very interesting, speaking of the power of stories, she writes in that foreword that in the beginning, or when God began to create, depending on which translation you want to use for Genesis 1:1, is what she says is the Jewish version of Once Upon a Time.
Yes, I love that.
This is a very, very wonderful introduction. So the Shabbat, and you have a story about a gentleman by the name of Shmuley. Tell me about him.
It's Shmooey.
Shmooey. I'm from New Jersey. You're lucky we can talk anyway.
So Shmooey and the Shabbat encounter is a really interesting story. It takes place in Helm, but it's a lost story of Helm. And I was imagining, what if the people of Helm were not necessarily fools, but rather had some sort of predisposition towards dementia? What if it's not just that they're not smart? Because they're such earnest, all of the Helm stories, they're such earnest, good, values-based people. And so I wanted to explore this idea with Shmooey. And Shmooey is one of the leaders in Helm. And ultimately, he starts to decline in his memory, in his short-term and long-term memory, until he gets to the point where he doesn't remember his own name. He doesn't remember home, where his home is, and he doesn't even remember Shabbat. He doesn't remember the sound of the cantor's voice or his life partner or anything. He just knows how to walk. And so he wanders, and he eventually reaches a town where he hears people talking about Shabbat coming, and everybody seems to be bustling about getting ready for Shabbat to arrive. And Shmooey realizes, well, this Shabbat person must be really important, maybe even royalty. And perhaps if I could get cozy with Shabbat, Shabbat might tell me who I am and help me find my home. And so that's the premise of the story. And Shmooey he's very beloved to me. He's very dear to me. I mean, a lot of the characters, they really live on their own. They have their own personalities. I feel like I sketched them, but they got animated on their own. But
no,
he's very loving.
Oh no, they do. They're very relatable. For example, you have a story of Allison searching for her Hebrew name, which just about every colleague has probably had a variation of this conversation with a colleague, with a kid, with a family. You know, you're doing a baby naming, you pull out the collage book and say, okay, let's go through all the name. You know, I just did this with a family a couple of days ago. But that's the power of the name, isn't it? Because you have this whole dialogue with the cantor, with the rabbi and everything. Talk to me about Allison.
Yeah. And I love her parents too, because her parents, you know, they're kind of secular, although they belong to a synagogue, and they never gave her a Hebrew name, never really thought about it. And so now they're kind of involved in trying to help her. And they make suggestions like, how about Glita? You like ice cream,
right.
or you were born near Rosh Hashanah. How about Shofara? Is that a name? And they're all creative, wonderful wrestlings with what it means to pick a name when you're a little bit older. And the little twist in that story, of course, is that it's not just about Allison choosing a name that she likes. There is a name out there that is her name. And the name itself has also been looking for her. And that's sort of a theme that I've always loved in storytelling, but also in my rabbinate is, you know, even teaching Judaism, when I teach someone some aspect of our tradition, when I teach congregants or other folks, I remind myself that I'm not actually giving them something new. I'm just unlocking the key to a treasury room that is their inheritance. I'm just leading them back to their own inheritance. This is yours already. And I've always thought of Jewish education as that Jewish education is a process of returning treasure to those to whom it belongs, because it belongs to everyone. And I love that idea in Allison Searches for Her Hebrew Name, that it's not enough to just like a name. It has to also like you. There's a little tiny covenant that's involved in it as well.
Do you believe, like a little Heschel, that meaning is constantly in search of us? So if the name was in search of Allison, then, you know,
I do. Yeah. And it's the name of your podcast too, Seekers of Meaning. And I do believe that. I also believe that in an even bigger way, that the world unfolds to us in a way that it wants to, that the relationship that we have with the world is not one direction. So if I've always had a deep faith and belief in God, that's how the world has unfolded to me. But when I speak to someone who's an atheist, I sense that that's how the world has spoken to that person. And so we both have truthful relationships with the world. And it's so extraordinary to be privileged to step into someone's life and get to know how the world has spoken to them, you know, based on their experiences and everything. And so we all have this little, you know, if you think about how white light goes through a prism and then becomes a spectrum of color, we all have, you know, our little band in that spectrum. But we're just, each one of us is just a piece of that pure original light. So, you know, so there's a deeper meaning in the Allison story.
Oh no, it's again, to reiterate, these are lovely stories, but they're more than just stories. This is why I'm glad you included the questions at the end, because they really do spark, and they open up doors to various ways of thinking, because you're a very, very talented writer. I mean, let's be honest, you're very gifted. So there's another one of these wonderful little vignette stories about the two rocks.
Oh.
And you have, in the beginning of the story, a line about, and let me quote it exactly, very few people realize that a silence is not uniform and empty. And and you weave this with these two rocks from two different cultures. And I mean, the symbolism is like, again, it's a high holiday sermon. But talk to me about how you view silence, because it's part of that story.
Well, it's so interesting. I'll just say that I've written so many pages, hundreds of pages about silence that probably no one will ever see. Behind each one of these stories, whether it's a 6-page story or a 20-page story, are hundreds of pages of writing that got curated. But so it's a concept that really interests me, that the sound of the sound of a quiet night, the silence that you experience in, when everyone has gone to sleep and the night is quiet, is a different silence than the silence you experience when you expect someone to say, I love you, and they don't, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different types of silences. And to me, silence itself is its own language. And I've often wondered, and this is really the origin of the story of the two rocks, if we could become more fluent, more literate in the language of silences, if we could start to understand nature, if nature is speaking all the time, but as opposed to, it was interesting in that story because every time the rocks dialogued with each other, I didn't want to say, this rock said, or this rock, spoke, because they're not speaking, right? So I used words like impressed or emanated or, vibrated. And they're all different forms of communicating with silence. So our body language, the air is filled with essays. If only we could quiet ourselves to listen.
No, the vibrations thing is very powerful. I mean, I really, because I do believe that, and I think there's studies that there are even in the universe is giving
everything.
Out,
yes.
Constant vibrations. And now I don't want to go off on too many different tangents, but the silence thing, it's always fascinating that in the silent prayer, if people still do it in synagogues, that they'll immediately have to fill the silence with the piano.
Right.
It's like, no, just sit with yourself for a while. I mean, nothing's going to happen. Nothing to be afraid of. You don't need
At our synagogue, we did that too. We, during the silent prayer, we would have, a little beautiful noodling on the keyboard until I got an email from a congregant, who's actually was a young person in his 20s and said that really looked forward to the actual silence. And we changed it because of that. But being comfortable with silence it's so important because it speaks to, our shorter attention spans and needing to be stimulated all the time, and the economy of distraction. There's so much. Every business wants to distract us with their shininess and their noise.
And the music, if you walk in and you have to have something playing, silence is very frightening. It frightens the heck out of a lot of people.
Yeah,
for
it does.
Variety of reasons. Before we start running out of time, one other just quick story. It's great. And the Yophiel, which I'm probably mispronouncing.
I love Yophiel.
Did you do that purposely, Yofi and then Ale?
So it's interesting in terms of, you mean the beauty of God?
Yofi
being beautiful or greatness.
Did you do that purposely?
Well, I'll tell you something, that there is actually in some esoteric literature, there is an angel named Yophiel who is the keeper of the secrets of the Torah. And so I used to really, still, I'm fascinated by angelology, and just, it's so interesting how in Judaism, we don't think that we believe in angels. And oftentimes people will say, well, we don't believe in angels. And yet here we are singing Shalom Aleichem, and there's Jacob's wrestling with angels. There's angels outside the Garden of Eden.
We have a whole roster of angels.
Angels. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's the job of Raphael and Gabriel and this.
Right. And my son is named Raphael, which is the angel of the east wind. There's, angels for everything. But we've moved from the idea of, sentient beings as angels to, our mitzvot are the angels that the angelic energy we put in the world. But Yophiel, when I learned about Yophiel, it just stuck with me. This idea that there is a specific angel who guards the secrets of the Torah. And what if that angel didn't do a good job? What a wonderful thing that is to have a clumsier angel. And so that was the birth of the story of Yophiel.
No, it's a great story because first of all, it talks about very humanizing. He messes up.
Yes. And also in a way, Yophiel connects with the most important person in the world, because what if the person is someone who is, what do you call it? Is neuroatypical, right? What is their role in society? What do they contribute? And Yophiel is very much neuroatypical. And he has a definite, not just a little job. He has a really, really
big job,
big job, a universe altering job, specifically because of that. There are even aspects in Torah where, you can't fulfill the mitzvah of leaving the fallen sheaths for the poor if you don't drop some of them. So there are some mitzvot that depend on you messing up a little bit, which I think is really cool. Goes back to the first line you quoted about perfection.
No, it's just, yes, there's one of the books back there, The Spirituality of Imperfection. And it's the Broken Tablets Midrash too. I mean, it's do you have an angel? Do you have an angel? Would you have angels with you?
That's such a beautiful question. I truly believe this. I truly believe that every encounter that we have leaves a little bit of angel, a little sprinkle of pixie dust residue on us. And so it's really a mixture of all of the encounters, including this one with you.
No, well, thank you. In conclusion, I'm going to go to the end of the book. So you have this God chooses a genre at the end. And then one of your questions, this is an easy question, nice softball question. Says, one of the questions you have is on the high holidays, we talk about the book of life. So Rabbi Zoe Klein, what's the title for your book of life?
Wow. Was that one of my questions? That's one of
Yes, that's Rabbi.
I should try to answer the questions that I asked. So what is the title? Well, do you have one for yours? I'm trying to buy time.
Nice, Rabbi. That's nice. That's very well done. Very well. But I had the same class at HUC,
Right. Politicians take that class too, right?
Thank you very, very much. And the answer is, Rabbi?
So, the title of, and I have not thought about this, the title of the book of my life would be, something, this sounds too wordy, but something like mysterious, maybe, how about, enchantment? I'll just choose that word. Enchantment.
That's a great way. It's a great way to end.
Because it's mystery and it's magic, and it's all mystery and magic.
And it is mystery. That's the one thing it is. That's the one thing this is. A magical mystery ride.
Yes. Yes.
Rabbi Zoe Klein, thank you for taking us on part of that magical mystery ride on Candle, Feather, Wooden Spoon, CCAR Press, subtitled New Jewish Stories. Again, colleagues, people who do this stuff in synagogues or organizations, I really recommend you get a hold of this book. You can get it anywhere. bookstores and the great God Amazon, and it will you'll have a delightful time reading it and teaching it. So Zoe, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Continued
Richard.
success,
Thank you.
good help. Hope we bump into each other somewhere, somehow. Just continue doing the great work you're doing. It's wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
To all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. We want to thank our sponsor, the Rothkopf Law Firm, which provides, as we told you before, a full range of assistance to individuals and families. You can connect with them at rothkopflaw.com. Again, if you'd like to make a comment or suggestion about our program, just email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. If you'd like to make a tax-free donation to help support our work, go to the website, go to the conveniently located donate button, click on that, and just follow the prompts. It's real easy. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and a big shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. Again, I am your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for your time and joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning. In the meantime, till we see each other again, stay safe, stay healthy, and be kind to one another. Shalom.